Pema CD Hong Ngong Ah Hong Benzagur Pema CD Hong Ngong Ah Hong Benzagur Pema CD Hong. Welcome everyone to my Sunday Dharma talk, number 20 today in our series of 34 talks on the Digha Nikaya, the first part of the Sutta Pitaka, which is the second part of the Pali Canon. There's my personal information. If any of you are new or would like to review any of the personal information, I have a couple of brief news items to share with you before I begin. The Dharma Transmission to the West group now has an art gallery located in Goldbach. That's Goldbach, an art gallery and tea house, and you're welcome to visit us there if you're interested. It's our mainland nexus, and I am also, the second item is I am finally putting together a Buddhist tour of Second Life, which will be a series of links on a note card, and we will gather in the parking lot of the gallery probably and teleport from place to place, where I'll talk about the significance of each site for maybe 5 minutes, and we'll spend an hour or an hour and a half doing that as a tour, a Buddhist tour of Second Life, with myself as your guide. So I'm working on that, and as soon as it's available, I'll send out a message to Buddha Center and Dharma Transmission to the West. It'll probably be something I offer once a month on a regular basis, and we'll probably change it slightly as we go along. So those are the items. Today's talk is somewhat short, the Mahasamaya Sutta, which I'm translating the Great Gathering. It's number 20 in the Digha Nikaya, and it's a fairly short sutta, so I don't anticipate this talk to take much longer than half an hour, and then we can have just whatever discussion you would be interested in having. So in this sutta, the Buddha is in the great forest of Kapila Watu, which is his hometown, the capital of the Shakya territory, and the place where the Buddha grew up. The Buddha had promised his father, Chief Suddhodana, to return to Kapila Watu Kapila Watu, after he achieved enlightenment. I believe the Buddha returned to Kapila Watu 4 years later too, at least twice, possibly more times, but those are the 2 times that I'm aware of. So this sutta may describe the occasion of his initial or subsequent return. There's no real way to evaluate which visit to Kapila Watu is being referred to. I've also mentioned in other talks that the Pali Canon refers to devas, or devas, literally shining or luminous beings that inhabit higher dimensions or planes of existence, who also inhabit or visit the earth plane. Here we find again this motif, which, as you can see, pervades the Pali Canon. It isn't just one reference, but multiple references scattered throughout the canon, so these are the sorts of things we're particularly interested in. The sutta says that devas from the 10 world systems frequently, quote-unquote, visited the Buddha and the Sangha at Kapila Watu. Walsh, our translator, provides no explanation, except that he does note that Rhys Davids's translation of 10,000 world systems is wrong. The reference to 10,000 world systems refers to the horizontal extension of samsara, whereas the present context, of course, is vertical, the vertical dimension or polarity of reality, which is essentially the spiritual polarity or dimension of reality. Nevertheless, the repetition of the number 10 and 10,000 is not accidental, and the 10 world systems, for those of you who are familiar with Kabbalah, the 10 world systems suggest the 10 Sephirot of the Kabbalah, which is the basis of the Western esoteric system and the cosmology of that system. So the correspondence to the Buddhist system is quite interesting. We have discussed the 31 planes of existence in other talks, especially my talk on fallen angels, human beings, and the earth plane. But how they may be divided, that's 31 of 31 planes, how they may be divided into 10 is speculative. We know from other texts that humans and the devas in the realms above the earth plane interact. including the 4 great kings, up to the Brahma realms. I've talked about this cosmology several times, so I'm not going to go into it in much depth in this talk. The devas of the formless realm have no business with human beings and have no physical shape or location. This leaves the 4 major realms of the Rupa Loka, which together with the 6 realms of the Kama Loka make 10 world systems. So that is my proposal as to what exactly the world that are being referred to are when the Sutta refers to the 10 world systems. And there they are. You can see at the top the numbers 1 through 10. At the top, the 5 pure abodes where the arhants go before they transcend samsara altogether. The glorious devas, the radiant devas, which is the original home of humanity. And then in the Kabbalistic system, there's a leap or a gap called Dat, and the Brahma devas corresponding to heaven in both the Brahmanic and the Judeo-Christian system is the highest level of world, if you like, in what would be considered manifest worlds. This is in the Kabbalistic system, and you'll notice the Hebrew word for the Sephirot that corresponds to Brahma devas is chesed, which means loving kindness. Exactly. And of course we know the significance of loving kindness or metta meditation in the Buddhist system, which leads to rebirth in just that realm, the Brahma devas. So you can see just how close the correspondence is with the Kabbalistic system. Then there's the devas who appropriate the work of others. I've called them the capitalists of the Kamaloka. That's the desire realm that we inhabit. The devas who delight in made shapes. An interesting, another translation of Tiferet, besides adornment, is beauty. The satisfied devas, which is the Tusita realm, which is where the bodhisattvas are reborn in their final birth before their final human birth, wherein they become a Buddha. The 33 gods at the top of Mount Meru, which is the original home of the Asuras. The Yama devas, which is a somewhat ambiguous realm. Some people translate Yama as death, others translate it with reference to time. So I'm still trying to find out a little bit more about the Yama devas, and of course the 4 great kings, which is the lowest system of nature, if you like, in the Kabbalistic system, and that corresponds to the elves, gnomes, fairies, goblins, tree spirits, all those types of beings that we're very familiar with from world mythology, not merely Buddhist or even Indian mythology. So that's the table. It will be in the blog. It won't be in the note card because I can't reproduce tables in the note cards, but that is on the blog. So you can take a look at that later if you wish. And the worlds of manifestation are also divided, interestingly, into 6 classes of being, the same number as the 6 lower realms of the Kamaloka. And I think where everyone's here is familiar with the 6 classes of being, the devas, the human beings, the asuras, the ghosts, blah, blah, blah. So I'm not going to go into that in further depth either. The Pali mentions 4 devas of the pure abodes, the place where non-returners go before they attain nirvana, the highest realm of the form realm, corresponding to the 4th jhana, the jhana from which one escapes into emancipation. And they resolve to visit the Buddha. There's no explanation, they simply do. The Sanskrit version of the sutta mentions 4 female devas from the Brahma world. So there you have an alternative reading from the Sanskrit version of the same sutta. These suttas appear instantaneously before the Buddha and praise the Sangha in verse. The Sangha is referred to as the unconquered brotherhood, quote unquote, and spotless seers like well-trained elephants, quote unquote, referring to their, quote, concentrated minds, unquote. They use the interesting metaphor, quote, bars and barriers broken, the threshold stone of lust torn up, unquote, referring to the stone that constitutes the sill of a doorway or perhaps the wall of a house, the symbolic cornerstone, or for those of you who've traveled in Gorian realms in Second Life, it appears as the homestone. So this is a universal archetype. Symbolically, It is the cornerstone or linchpin of the whole psychic system. Jung says that the house represents the whole psyche, which must first become disorganized if it is to be transcended. So the Buddhist path, according to this metaphor, is a process of deconditioning. The word is a word that's often used, and that really puts the puts it accurately. It's a process of psychological, of disciplined psychological disorganization or deconditioning. That is the Buddhist path, according to that metaphor. The doctrine is expressed that those who take refuge in the Buddha, and note here it's not the triple formula of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, but simply in the Buddha. These will not be reborn in a lower world, but will be reborn as a deva. Of course, in Buddhism, rituals have no significance or intrinsic efficacy. So what is being referred to here when the reference to taking refuge, the formula of taking refuge is mentioned, is not the ritual, but the internal process of which the ritual is really simply an outward expression. The Buddha declares that he will teach the monastics concerning the devas of the 10 world systems. The teaching comes across almost as an initiatory transmission, similar in principle to the Kala Chakra, really, it seems to me, or any other initiatory transmission type of indoctrination. But the Kala Chakra comes to mind, primarily because of its visionary and public character. It seems to be an oft-repeated question whether devas can attain nirvana. I know I've been asked this question a couple of times before, occurring as it does at Kapila Vastu, the place from which the Buddha came. The Buddha commands the monastics to see the devas, and they strive to see them, an interesting detail. We know, of course, that the devas of the 5 pure abodes do in fact attain nirvana from the deva realms. So, as with women, we know that it is possible, but the suttas also state that it is a rare and difficult thing for them to do because of their great happiness and ease. Nevertheless, we know that the devas rejoice when a Buddha is to be born, and that there are devas who follow the Dharma. The sutta describes a collective vision of numbers of devas, ranging from hundreds or thousands to innumerable, quote-unquote, all around. Shared visionary perceptions of luminous phenomena are, of course, part of the UFO phenomenology, and I've mentioned this before in the past. The sutta also implies that experiences of this type are only available to advanced individuals like the Buddha and his monastics, and that the experience varies according to the quality of consciousness of the percipient. To cite a well-known example, in the vision of Fatima, which occurred in 1917, and you can see an artist's interpretation of the Fatima apparition on the slide. Some saw nothing. Some people in the crowd of thousands saw nothing, but others saw a great deal more, and in varying degrees. Different people saw different things. The cameras, of course, picked up nothing. Superhuman vision must be activated by striving. Reality, therefore, is constructed by consciously directed intention. The quality of the seer, or literally seer, the seer is thus described, quote, "Those who dwell composed and resolute, like lions in mountain caves, have overcome hair-raising fear and dread, their minds white and pure, unstained and calm," unquote. The Buddha conquered fear in the forest, you may recall, during his 6 years of asceticism, and he also prescribed going into the forest to meditate for the purpose of overcoming fear. This is also mentioned elsewhere in the Pali Canon. The Buddha prescribed mantras for these renunciates, one of the proofs in the Pali Canon that the Buddha believed in the efficacy of mantras and used them. The Buddha proceeds to describe the Deva hosts. Hosts, really an archaic term for armies, variously described as trains, retinues, and actual armies in the description. So imagine all these thousands of devas in their various hierarchies with their chiefs and their associated retinues or armies, literally armies, as they appear before the Sangha. And Walsh compares the list to Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. It's a very apt comparison. If you visualize the vast gatherings of spiritual beings in the Lord of the Rings, all different types, you'll have exactly the image that this sutta is presenting. The act of naming has an archaic archetypal mythological significance, which is also one of the reasons why I would compare this event, if you like, to an initiatory transmission, or simply an initiation. The Buddha seems quite intent and purposeful that the monastics should see the devas and communicate with them. The description begins with numbers of yakshas, earthbound devas who also inhabit the realm of the four great kings. We encountered the yaksha Janavasabha in Sutta 18. That was the good king Bimbisara, who was reborn as a king in the realm of the four great kings, named Janavasabawa, Janavasabawa, in Sutta 18. As I mentioned then, there are two sorts of yaksha. One type is an inoffensive, even beneficent nature fairy, associated with woods and mountains. The other type appears as a ghost or ogre that haunts the wilderness and attacks and devours travelers. These yakshas originate in Kapila Vastu, the Himalayas, and Mount Sata. Mount Sata, I'm not sure where that is, but of course Kapila Vastu and the Himalayas we're well familiar with. These also appear to be followers of Kapila, the founder of Kapila Vastu, the famous Proto-Sankhya Vedic philosopher who lived, I think, a couple hundred years before the Buddha. Another group from Rajagaha are said to be followers of the rishi Vesamita. A third group, also from Rajagaha, follow Kumbhira. Kumbhira is the chief of the Kumbhandas, dwarfish, misshapen spirits traditionally represented with big stomachs or testicles. They are a subtype of yaksha and inhabit the southern part of the realm of the four great kings under Viruhaka, the guardian of that direction. And here again we see the Buddhist notion that some devas are living invisibly amongst us on the earth, to which I have alluded from time to time. The Buddha proceeds to describe the realm of the four great kings, next above the earth plane, including the names of the four great kings themselves, who guard the four directions. I've given the names before, so I'm not going to repeat them here. And the names of their vassals, described interestingly as skilled deceivers, quote unquote. So the realm of the four great kings, like the earth realm, appears to be a morally ambiguous realm with good and evil existing together. These include beings like Matali, the Deva's charioteer. Other beings of many different sorts appear, including Nagas, the great snake spirits, fierce Garuda birds with intelligence and social organization, which, like the Brahmins, are referred to as twice born, and even the Asuras, the anti-gods who were cast out of the realm of the 33 gods by Indra, described as, quote, ocean dwellers now in magic skilled, unquote. And of course, I've discussed the Asuras at some length in previous talks as well. The Buddha refers to devas of the elements, water, earth, fire, and wind. Soma, the god of the primordial psychedelic sacrament of the rishis that inspired them to recite the Veda. I've talked about that in the past talks. Devas of the moon and the sun. Constellation gods, clearly referring to the astrological signs of the zodiac. So next time someone tells you that astrology is not referenced in the Pali Canon, you can point this passage out to them. And Jospe asks, why is a Brahmin being called twice born? Because a Brahmin is an individual who is spiritually superior, who in the course of the spiritual quest is seeking the death rebirth experience. They are ascetic, at least ideally. This is, of course, one of the criticisms of the Buddha, of the Brahmins of his time, that they were in fact self-indulgent and not ascetic. But the Brahma spirituality, like Buddha's spirituality, is a spirituality of the twice-born. It is based on renunciation and rebirth, unlike the spirituality of the once-born, who do not recognize the unsatisfactoriness of existence and seek to cultivate a spirituality of nature. So that's the essential difference between the once-born and the twice-born. Literally, it refers to being born from a human-type birth, where one is reborn from a mother, and then spiritually reborn, hence the Brahmas are twice-born. In the case of the Garuda birds, they're twice-born because they are born first as an egg, and then they are hatched from an egg. So that's the reason for them being called twice-born. But in the context of Brahmanism, of course, it has a somewhat different significance. Nonetheless, both are referred to as twice-born. And perhaps if you dig into the symbolism of the Garuda birds, you'll find some spiritual reason for that as well. That would be an interesting project to undertake. So, Jospe, in the notes it stated the bird's folk are born first in the egg, then as the bird, which I just mentioned. So does that answer your question adequately? They're both called twice born, but they have slightly different significances in the different contexts. But at the same time, the Garuda bird may be, for all I know, symbolic of Brahmin spirituality. That's something that would be interesting to research. And even the Asuras, the anti-gods who were cast out of the realm of the 33 gods by Indra, described as ocean dwellers now in magic skilled. So even the Asuras attend this great assembly of devas. The Buddha refers to devas of the elements, water, earth, fire, wind. Soma, the god of the primordial psychedelic sacrament of the rishis that inspired them to recite the Veda, which I've talked about in the past in my talk on Was the Buddha a Shaman? Devas of the moon and the sun, constellation gods, clearly referring to the astrological signs of the zodiac. Sprites of clouds, quote-unquote, quote. Beings manlike and more than manlike, again, quote-unquote. Pajuna, the thunderer who causes rain. Pajunya, the thunderer who causes rain. And gods of flame, asavas. Some of the names are recognizable as referring to the lower realms of what we know as the 31 planes of existence. The Brahmas, including Harita, the ancestor of the Brahmin lineage, and Sanat Kumara, who appeared to the assembly of the 33 gods, as we know well from recent suttas. Those who delight in shapes they've made, quote-unquote. Those who seize another's work, quote-unquote. Those are Walsh's translations for the top two realms of the Kamaloka. The Tusita realm, Yama, the lord of the Yama realm, whose name may mean death or time. Saka, the lord of the realm of the 33 gods, and of course the Asura realm in the one world ocean. The overall impression is one of the universal profligacy of life at all different stages and degrees of conscious development, as well as the universal tendency to labeling and organization that seems to be the essential nature of sentient life itself. And some of the beings listed in this very comprehensive, diverse, and cosmopolitan description are quite suggestive of the shamanic worldview, as I suggested in my talk, Was the Buddha a Shaman? So there are clearly shamanic elements even in the Pali Canon. So the Devas, the Buddhas, and the monastics are all arrayed in perfect splendor, Again, imagine the Lord of the Rings type gathering. When Mara comes, called here the Black One, with his host or army, and Mara shouts, "Come on, seize and bind them all, with lust we'll catch them all. Surround them all about, let none escape, whoever he may be." Quote unquote. This situation makes it clear that Mara's teleology is to enslave humanity to samsara through desirous attachment. He is, one might say, the personification of desirous attachment. The military metaphor is also clear. The field of desire is conflicted. Survival of the fittest, a social Darwinian might say. But Mara falls back, enraged but powerless, quote unquote, for there is no basis for lust in this assembly. Quoting, "And Mara's hosts drew back from those on whom neither lust nor fear could gain a hold. Victorious, transcending fear, they've won. His followers rejoice with all the worlds." Unquote. The repeated reference to fear in this sutta is interesting. Mara is usually associated with lust, but here he is also, and perhaps elsewhere as well, he is also associated with fear. Hence the significance of the meditation on fear mentioned above, which, as I said, appears also in the early career of the Buddha in the Pali Canon. Overcoming fear and overcoming lust are related. So we may also say that fear, apparently the inverse of desirous attachment, is really its corollary and complement, and perhaps even its essence. Thus, if we overcome the fear of loss, then we can overcome the desire to control and possess. Again, a very tantric type insight. This sutta has the same numinous character as Sutta 19. I see a question here. A Glow Phoenix asks, lust and fear. Lust is associated with attraction. Does fear refer to aversion? I think fear, aversion would fall under the rubric of fear, and of course aversion itself is a kind of attachment. We find this in religious Buddhism, and not just Buddhism, we find this in religions all the time. We find, as we were talking about before the beginning of the talk, we find religionists who are intensely attached to the path and become self-righteous and judgmental. In fact, we have a model for that in the Pali Canon in the person of Devadatta. So that, and the Buddha does specifically warn against attachment, not only to ritual rites and rituals, but also to beliefs. And he does also speak about attachment to the path as well, as a form of hindrance. A high-level hindrance, perhaps, but a hindrance nonetheless. So this sutta has the same numinous character as Sutta 19, which we also called a spirit communication, or which we called a spirit communication. It's the first one we encountered in the Pali Canon. This is the second, because I would be prepared to say that this sutta also appears to be another example of a similar type of sutta, a spirit communication, in fact, a spirit teaching, if you like. We're beginning to see that such phenomena seem, therefore, to appear early on in the development of the Buddhist cult, contrary to those who would assert that these types of writings only appeared in Tibetan Buddhism, Taoism, Mahayana, and later forms of Buddhism. We find them right here in the Pali Canon. And this is also something we find in the context of Christianity. For a long time, the Church denied that Gnosticism had any place in the early Christian texts, and was in fact a perversion of the original of Christianity. But since the discovery of the Nag Hammadi library, we have in fact discovered that Gnosticism had a similar relationship to the early Christian cult before it was suppressed by the Church of Rome. And in fact, some Gnostic texts are as early as, if not earlier, than the earliest canonical Christian texts. So this is exactly the same kind of process that we find in Christianity. We also see happened in Buddhism after the Buddha's death. To put it in a nutshell, after the Buddha's death, I would say, as I've argued in other talks, that Buddhism became a more and more organizationalist, more and more fundamentalist, and finally split into multiple sects. But these texts that we're discussing here are pre-sectarian, and still we see these spirit-type texts in amongst these quasi-historical texts. So that completes my talk. Just to finish off, I will give a brief summary of the principal ideas or doctrines, if you like, that I would say we find in this text. That the suttas visit the Buddha and that he learns from them, that he receives teachings from them. That deva travel is instantaneous, just an interesting technical detail. That those who take refuge in the Buddha will not experience a lower rebirth, that is, lower than human, that is to say, as a ghost, an asura, or a hell being. That devas manifest as luminous aerial phenomena. That devas are only visible to those of refined mindfulness. That the meditation that destroys fear is part of the Buddhist path of dispassion. That some devas live invisibly amongst men on earth, men and women, of course, humans. That the asuras are skilled in the practice of magic. I think this is the first time this has been pointed out. So the asuras are sorcerers or magicians. Once again, I've mentioned in previous talks, if you're interested in what asura spirituality looks like, you need to go no further than Aleister Crowley, who lived between 1875 and 1947 and attempted to establish a world asura-type religion. And finally, that desires, attachment, fear, and warfare are all interrelated. Those are the doctrines, a little subtle perhaps, but they're there. If you look, they're there in the sutta, implicit in this sutta, the Sutta of the Great Gathering. And that completes my talk for today. As I said, it was somewhat short. Next week we'll be doing the 21st Sutta of the Digha Nikaya. And now, before we dedicate the merit of this talk to all beings, I'm happy to entertain any questions. If anyone has any questions or anything they'd like to discuss. And if you get a chance, please feel free to visit our new gallery in Goldbach. Any questions? It seems not. So let's dedicate the merit of this talk to all beings. Whatever understanding. I see something there. Let me finish. Okay, I didn't start it, so let's look at this first. Just Ospace says, I missed last week's talk, and while reading your note card, I stumbled over this topic, which seems important to me. The topic is the heart, its spiritual function in a person, the way this function is represented in Buddha's teaching. You said in your talk, the Buddha further declares that those of his disciples who have fully mastered my window closed. The Buddha further declares that those of his disciples who have fully mastered my teaching achieve uncorrupted freedom of heart and mind, that is, loving kindness and mindfulness. One has to suppose that it was important to Buddha to differentiate between the uncorrupted quality of the heart and that of the mind. In other words, if your loving kindness were to be regarded as an uncorrupted quality included in the mind, it would have been purposeless for the Buddha to mention uncorrupted freedom of heart at all. This topic is even more important if one realizes the importance of the issue of dispassion versus passion. In Buddhism, obviously passion often is associated with the heart. My question is this, does this mean that be? Okay, well I followed you up to that point. Heart and mind, of course, are also important in the chakra system. The Buddhists also refer to body, speech, and mind. And, of course, heart and mind, mindfulness, and the qualities of compassion. Two aspects of the psyche, which are both important in spiritual development. The heart, or passion, refers to clinging. The mind refers to ignorance. So it also appears prominently in the Paticca Samuppada as well. So I agree with your observation. I can't really explain it much more than that. It's a way of classifying the path and the human being, and we're all familiar that we have this quality of sentience in itself, which is the inherent quality of mind, and then we also have the intentionality of the heart, which is rooted in passion. And even at the highest level of reality, you have insentience and intentionality coexisting as the ultimate dyad, the transdual dyad. That is the ultimate terms that we can apply to reality itself, beyond simply emptiness. A Glow Phoenix says, so danger lies not only in attachment, also in aversion. Absolutely. If you experience intense aversion and you begin to cultivate the spiritual path, what you're going to find is you've excluded a significant portion of your psyche from that process. To exclude it, you have to repress it in the language of psychoanalysis. And as we know from psychoanalysis, including Jung, that which is repressed reemerges in corrupt, archaic, distorted, and neurotic forms. And we thought this is precisely Jung's criticism of Christianity. He says that Christianity can only ever be neurotic because of its rejection of the dark shadow side of the human personality. Buddhism, especially in its largest interpretation, Buddhism does not exclude this aspect of the self at all. Rather, it includes it in mindfulness and thus dissipates its efficacy. This is the significance of the Buddha's encounter with Mara. At the moment of his enlightenment, it was necessary for him to come into direct relationship with the shadow side and then depotentiate it through dispassion. It's not a question of repressing it or denying it or attempting to lock it out of one's consciousness. It's a question of accepting it, recognizing it, and transmuting it into enlightenment itself. Jos Dospe says, does this mean that Buddha taught that love or loving kindness is an uncorrupted quality of the heart rather than that it is an uncorrupted quality of the mind? This to many modern Buddhists might seem more a Christian doctrine than a Buddhist one. Oh, I think Buddhism definitely includes this Christian aspect of compassion, and although certain Mahayana sects were aware of Christianity and attempted to imitate them, it certainly is present in the early Buddhist texts. The whole emphasis on metta meditation, whereby one is reborn in heaven, is a purely Christian doctrine. One might speculate that, in fact, it's the original doctrine that Christianity simply reprocessed, but that would take us far afield. But yes, I do believe that it does mean that, to answer your question. Jos Jospe, courage, the opposite of fear, is also associated as being a quality of heart. That's right. Is metta heart energy? I would say so, yes, absolutely. Metta is heart energy. Love, the power of loving kindness, which actually achieves superior rebirth. So it has a salvific quality. Now, it's not the ultimate salvific quality. Metta meditation will only get you rebirth in a Deva world, specifically the world of the Brahmas. It will not gain you emancipation. Nevertheless, it is a necessary and inherent quality of emancipation. Wisdom is the salvific quality. Any other questions? Okay. Let's proceed then with the dedication of merit, whereby we dedicate the merit of this talk to all beings. whatever understanding, whatever positive force has come from this, may it go deeper and deeper and act as a cause to reach enlightenment for the benefit of all. Thank you very much for this opportunity to discuss Dharma. It is my pleasure and privilege. I will return next Sunday at 2 o'clock, second lifetime, to discuss the 21st Sutta of the Digha Nikaya. And until then, Namaskar.